Hello again, this is Jay Shepard from Arkansas State University. Last time we looked at ways to get you playing in some more of the flat keys with some scale patterns and positions that you may not have been familiar with. Today we're going to look at the some same scales we did last time, the major, the Mixolydian, and the Dorian, but we're going to look at them in some different positions and patterns, as well as look at some arpeggios and 3 different patterns as well. First, let's take a look at the B-flat major scale. Last time we played it starting in 3rd position. By position, that means the finger or the fret that your first finger is on. So we played last time position that was like around the 3rd fret. This time we're going to move up to the 5th fret and start the scale with our 2nd finger actually. So our 2nd finger will play the B flat on the 6th fret, and the pattern will look something like this. It's good to know more than one pattern for a scale, because sometimes you come into passages of music that can be played more naturally if you play them in a certain scale pattern or not. Of course, you can go through and try to find the best possible fingering for every passage that you play, and that's good. But sometimes the difference is just maybe playing a certain passage in a different scale pattern. Let's look at another scale pattern for the B-flat major scale. This time it starts on the 6th fret, and notice I have kind of a reach between the 1st and 2nd finger, and it looks like this. This is a good pattern to learn as well. Notice with each pattern it takes you to higher positions on the fretboard, which means the notes that you can reach on the high E string if you wanted to become higher and higher as well. As with the first pattern, the highest note we could reach was a B flat. The second pattern we might be able to reach a C. And then with the final pattern, starting on the 6th fret, by the time we get to the end of the scale, we'd be able to easily reach a high E flat on the 11th fret. So range is definitely a consideration in what fingering you want to use for whatever scale passage that you may have to work through. Next, let's do the same thing with the Mixolydian mode. Remember, the Mixolydian mode is just like the major scale, but you add a flat to the key signature, and that will lower the 7th degree of the major scale by a half step. Let's look at the pattern in 5th position for the Mixolydian mode. As you can see, the 7th scale degree was 1 fret lower, and also on the 2nd octave I moved the A flat to the B string, so I didn't have to reach for it on the E string. So I put it on the 9th fret as opposed to putting it on the 4th fret of the E string. That way it would look something like this for the final 4 notes, and not like. So I just avoided a unneeded stretch there. Let's look at the Mixolydian pattern now on the 6th fret. One note about this pattern and the one before, but it's easier to see on this one, is we have something called a squeeze shift. So notice how the first 3 strings were the same finger pattern. This 1, 2, 4 pattern on the first 3 strings with a stretch in between 1 and 2, right? And then we went up to the 7th fret. So that wasn't much of a movement, but you still had to move the first finger up. But then right here, when we move up from the 7th fret to the 8th fret, there's a moment we're going to have to squeeze 4 fingers in the space of 3 frets. It's called a squeeze shift. And then when you get back to the other notes that you need to finish the scale, the fingers expand back out. So there's this moment of squeezing together and then relaxing and expanding back out. Now let's look at the Dorian mode in the same way. So we're going to start here on the second finger on the 6th fret, and immediately we're going to have a stretch, the 4th fret. Here's the pattern. Notice it's just like the Mixolydian, but the 3rd scale degree in both octaves has been lowered a half step. Let's look at the Dorian scale pattern in the 6th position. All these scale patterns are really beneficial. Like I said, one may be more useful for a certain passage of music than the other, so you have to know all of them equally. This is a very common concept. I learned this from a series of Berkeley music publications back when I was younger, and they would go through and play the same scale in 3 or 4 different positions or fingerings. And I noticed at that point, when I started studying that, my sight reading got a lot better. I really think it's the key to sight reading, and that and just reading as much music as you can, which will come in a later video. Let's look at some 7 arpeggios. Now 7th chord arpeggios are just built from the 1, 3, 5, 7 of some mode. What you want to do is be sure and notice what mode you're building the scale off of. For instance, the first mode we're going to build the scale, or build the arpeggio off, will be the major scale. Watch the example. It'll be a 1, 3, 5, 7, and a 1, and then again in another octave, and then back down. So what you have there is a B-flat major 7 arpeggio. That's what happens when you have a arpeggio built off the major scale. But notice we can play it in more than one position. So there was that position on the 3rd position where we played the starting note with the pinky on the 6th fret. We can also go down here and start the pattern on the 2nd finger, like we did the 2nd scale pattern. And that gives us a new fingering with new possibilities of other notes that we could hit in between the arpeggio notes. And then finally we can look at the 6th fret. In that pattern I like to play the 10th fret notes on the G and the B string. They'd be the F and the A respectively. But I play them both with my pinky finger, and I roll the pinky finger back and forth between both strings to help mute them so they don't ring together. That's one thing on these arpeggios you want to be very careful with. You don't want to let the notes kind of blur and ring together. You want them to be very clean and separate like they are on the scale notes. Now let's do the same thing, but do it with the Mixolydian mode. By doing this, we'll have the 7th be a half step lower. It'll be a minor 7th, and that'll produce a minor 7 arpeggio. Let's look at the first pattern. And the second one. And the next one. Remember, all these patterns are very important to learn. They may be more useful in some situations and less useful in others, but if you don't know the pattern that fits and you haven't worked it naturally into your technique, then chances are you're probably not going to find a good pattern to play a musical passage with once you do encounter it. Okay, let's look at an arpeggio that's built off of the Dorian mode. This will be the minor 7 arpeggio. Notice it's just like the 7 arpeggio we just played, but with the minor third. Here's the first example. Here it is in the next position. And in the next one. Finally, I'm going to look at the minor 7 flat 5 arpeggio. It's just one note different from the one you just learned. And as its name suggests, it's a minor 7 arpeggio, but with a flat 5. Let's look at the first pattern. And the next one. And the last pattern. This arpeggio is taken from the Locrian mode, and if you don't know what that is, I'm going to have a video coming up soon going over all the modes of the major scale. You'll want to check that out. So to put everything in summary, it's not just good enough to know a scale pattern to play something in, or know a pattern to play an arpeggio, or like you need to learn it at as many positions all over the neck and as many strings and octaves as you possibly can. That way the material that you learn is that many times as useful. So when you do see it in any particular situation, you're ready to handle it. Guitar is particular like this. Sure, there's instruments that have alternate fingerings for different notes, but guitar is the only thing that, you're in a different geographically positioned place to find the same note. For instance, I can play an E right here, 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 there. I can play that note in 6 different places on the guitar in 6, different strings. So it can be very confusing. That's why you have to take the extra discipline and be sure and learn all your scales and arpeggios in as many positions as you can. At least these 3.